Hello riders or not. Today is unusual episode. It's a priceless lesson by Simon. The reason it is a separate episode is because I filmed it and it was just too good to cut it into pieces and put it in our building episode. So I decided to do a separate one, and I am sure that lots of you who are new to motorcycle building and overall wants to know more about the motorcycles will benefit from this episode. The rest, I promise, that will be fun. I mean, it's always fun speaking with Simon and watching him, isn't it? I hope he will like it as well, because that wasn't planned and I'm not sure if he wants it. I might be told off and kicked out of the Mint Customs, hopefully not. Fingers crossed you'll like it as well. So and if we all will like it, I do. But if you will like it and he will like it, maybe it will become regular, a priceless lesson by Simon. Not a piece to the camera like this. You in your blue gloves. Can you get me to do a talk, because everything might die again? The important talk. What? The important talk. You know that today we promised everyone that they will be used.
Oh yeah. What shock absorbers?
Yeah, shock absorbers. We already said about the chain size.
Yeah, that's my back, guys. Yeah, chain size, sorry.
Yeah, and you said that you will talk about when you don't want camera. Where is our little drawing of the catwalk?
Oh.
You should throw it away.
Yeah.
Oh no.
I threw it away.
Okay, let me get the camera and go. I'm not sure if people will see it.
What? So whenever a rider sits down with a crew chief, if they've got no data from the circuit prior to visiting this, or they're running a different bike, or the team have delegated a different gearbox setup, they'll have to go out on their free practice one is normally called. They'll do a couple of laps and they'll get a track map. This is my really bad Cadwell. Jump. They'll get a track map and they'll come into their crew chief and they'll say, I'm not quite revving out in 6th gear there at the straight or here at the straight, or I'm revving out too early in 6th, or I can't take that gear at 8,000 RPM in 3rd, I need to take it either in 2nd or... So they'll have a track map. So whenever you see a rider coming in from circuit, their crew chief will have a little clipboard. His suspension guy will be stood behind him and his data guy will be pulling data off of the bike. I can explain a little bit about data and telemetry a bit later on. But the immediate problems are what gear the rider is in for each corner and each section of the track, because he has to get the most out of the bike. So there'll be a track map. I haven't got one printed off, obviously I haven't been racing for a long time, so I did a really rough drawing of Cadwell and a light illustration of what gear he's going to be in. He's in 3rd gear into there, short shift into 4th to carry that corner, down into 3rd for this long corner, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th onto the straight, down into 2nd for the bottom corner, blah blah blah, and so it goes on. So if the rider's struggling in a particular area and he feels that he needs to take 3rd gear, then when he comes back to the crew chief, they'll look at the data, they'll look at what size sprockets they're running. They'll either increase the back sprocket to give slightly more acceleration, or decrease the front, or increase the front and decrease the back. Bigger sprocket on the back, more acceleration. Smaller sprocket on the back, same with the front, other way around. Sometimes it's easiest just to keep governing front sprockets so you can actually manage the same chain, because if the gearing's really way out, then you have to change the chain as well. because the back sprocket's too big. I think the ratios are one sprocket on the front, one tooth on the front is equivalent to nearly 3 on the back. So one down the front is equivalent to nearly 3 up on the back. So they'll organise that, and that's what all the free practice is about. It's something we're not entering into because I'm going with stock gearing on this bike to save any grief any which way or other. Later on, if you feel as if you can't quite take that corner at that sort of speed, then we'll have a look at what the gearing's doing, or we'll have a look at where you're braking into it, maybe braking a bit too hard. Another thing that's really cool that they have on all the latest stuff is something called potentiometers, little pots, suspension pots, and they'll measure the travel. So there'll be a pot on the front forks that's like a really skinny, you can look out for it on MotoGP and stuff, you'll see them, little skinny push bike pump that's bolted to this part of the leg and the bottom of the fork leg, and that'll actually tell them what the fork travel is, what the sag is, what it is under braking, what it is under acceleration. Same with the shock, there'll be a tiny little pot on the back of the shock absorber on little brackets. That all goes through to telemetry. There's a bar pressure reading on the front brake, so they'll be able to tell how much brake pressure the rider's using going into a certain corner or the heaviest point he's braking. There's obviously other stuff like the throttle position. So that, yeah, they can alter compression rate, which is the rate at which the fork compresses, and the rebound rate, which is the rate at which things rebound using the spring. Spring also holds preload, which is literally exactly what it is. The front fork and the shock are held on a preload. They're preloaded already, so there's a certain amount of millimeters that they'll preload the spring up to lift the fork and to change the sag, which is the weight of the rider and the motorcycle just statically sat on the bike. That's called static sag. It says it in its name. And a quick rundown on the dark art or black art of setting up suspension. One is to actually kind of get in your head what's inside these things, because a lot of people, even if they're just changing fork seals, they'll pull a cartridge kit out and not realise what the cartridge does. Different oil weights, so obviously I think, well, a thicker oil will give a slower reacting fork or whatever, but inside a Moto 3 shock or you'll have a cylinder head that sits inside the cylinder body, this body here, and the cylinder head looks a little bit like an Öhlins one. Is a lot more complicated than this particular one, but there's a bush that the head runs inside the body on. There's oil flow rates, and there's something called shims, and these shims allow oil to go past. So the art of actually how to explain what a shock absorber does is it's all about oil rate and the flow of oil rate. So it's how fast you can flow oil through and return it, and it's all to do with the shims. Thinner the shims are, the faster the oil can get past the cylinder head. The thicker and the bigger the stack of shims that you put under here, the slower everything happens. That then is all held on a return pressure of nitrogen gas, which is normally held in these units here. And I think the bar, back when I was working for Öhlins, I think it's about 14 bar of nitrogen that these things run in here. It's unaffected by heat, that's why they use that gas. So it is all about how your oil is flowing, how your oil flows through everything. Same with the front forks. I'll show you a compression needle. It's a little needle here, and it just acts as a valve. That's all it does, and that sits in the bottom of your fork leg. And this is a compression needle, so the further in it is, the less oil can flow through it, and the slower everything will react, or the harder everything will react. And then the same with a rebound. There's a rebound rod that runs through here. That's the same situation. It's all about controlling oil flow through everything. That's how things work. Everything else held upright, and the rate at that everything boings up and down is spring rate, is to do with spring rate, and you can change springs In the Öhlins legs, it's a 10-second change to change a set, drop another set of springs in. With the stock legs, and that's a little bit more difficult. It's on a cartridge, but the basic rundown of how shock absorbers and forks work or suspension works is controlling the rate of oil which flows through everything. Is that any good?
Oh yeah.
Did that work?
I love it.
Everything else, I'll just Google it. No, genuinely, if you've got any questions you want answering about what you're doing right, what you're doing wrong, you've been to a track day and some idiots had a right I'll go at your preload and twiddled loads of everything, and now it doesn't feel right or it's not tipping in, then I can try and answer some of them. If you want to comment, I'll try and answer some of your problems if you've got any problems. Rule of thumb is, especially with Öhlins, there's something called an R sheet or a revised sheet. So whenever you take a shock into an Öhlins dealer, Harris Performance or any of the Öhlins trucks or anything that service anything stuff, there's always a revised sheet for the number of your shock that you've got. So if you've got a HR 46P2Z Zebra, Öhlins would have produced a sheet that will update your shim stacks in there, update whatever's going on. So, but rule of thumb is Öhlins design the shock for a particular bike, and their settings are normally about 30 clicks on each. So 30 clicks rebound, 30 clicks compression. And rule of thumb with Öhlins is run it in the middle. So it's 15, 15, and you can go either which way you like from that. But rule of thumb, and Öhlins sort these out so that it's about 30 clickers on each, and run them in the middle. So if you've got a decent shock like that and it is misbehaving, whack it all back into the middle and start again. Because loads of people just crank the compression up thinking that it's going to deal with everything, and it doesn't, and then that then works as a counter effect with a rebound because everything slows everything down. You get something called cold tear or tyre tear. That's normally a rebound problem when you get a tear on your tyre. The tyre is actually trying to recover through the shock stroke. The bike's using the tyre rather than the shock, so it tears the tyre up.
How about the forks? Like adjusting the forks?
Forks work exactly the same as a super skinny shock absorber, except the spring's inside. And it's the same again. If it's diving a lot under brakes, then you can up the compression and up the preload to hold the fork up. But then you have an adverse thing with something a bike that runs long or is not diving too much into the corner can tend to want to try and drift you wide. Whereas if you've got something that's diving a lot and using all of its stroke up,
Difficult on the straight.
not only is it difficult on the straight, makes it slightly unstable, but even then you're accelerating, so you're back up onto the fork leg, but it tends to tips in a bit quick because the front of the bike's really low. So it tends to turn in a little bit quick, and it's quite unstable mid-corner, but they work exactly the same as a shock absorber, so everything's on the...
So they need both to be balanced.
Yeah. Whenever I'm setting up, if I've got to work with a new rider and I haven't quite got on the same sheet as the rider, then I tend to try and put the bike at 50-50, and I tend to try and get it even under static sag so that everything's moving at the same rate. And then normally in that case the clickers are normally pretty much bang on in the middle. If there's 30, then it's bang on at 15. And we'll send him out, see what's happening with the tyres, we'll see what's happening with his feedback, we'll have a look at the data. Or even if it's just a track day and I'm setting him up for a track day, I'll just say, how does it feel, what's it doing? I'll have a look at the tyre, because normally the tyre tells me everything. And then we'll work from that. But rule of thumb is try and get the bike to compress all at the same time, at the more or less the same rate. Static sag's about the same, then it will feel quite balanced. But it's when you start to push on and then the extremes start happening that you actually might want to transfer some more to the front or more to the rear. But that's how the rider is. I know Carl Harris back in the day used to really like a soggy bike and a bike that really moved about a lot. And then you've got people like Jerry McWilliams who wanted it solid. His setups were so hard. Whereas Carl Harris's ex-motocrosser, he just liked everything to move. So there's lots of different settings there. There's no one golden setting for absolutely everybody. I like a really soggy bike. Sam likes a rock hard bike. And it's also instilling confidence into that rider. You can say, look, I've done the best I can with them legs, those forks, they're bob on now. You've got everything you need. You're off the bump stop. Everything's working fine. You pump him up full of confidence. All of a sudden, he's got a second and a half off his lap time. He comes back in, says bike's absolutely amazing, and you think that's cool because it's kind of where we were at the beginning of the day. But yeah, I'd say 80% of it is suspension and 20% of it is what you can get into the rider's head while you're setting the bike up. But any other questions, like dampers and stuff, anything like that you want to know about, then pop us it in the comment, and I'll read the comments on this episode. And well, I'll read the comments anyway, but then I'll try and answer some of your questions.
Do you read all of them?
What?
Do you read all of them?
Yeah, even the things you say, yeah. I'll read them. Could be quite nasty sometimes. No, but yeah, I'll try and help. Or unless you got any tips for me, let me know. Think, oh right, well I've run this jigsaw, blah blah blah. I dumped the forks through 5mm and it worked better. I didn't take the spacer out the shock or whatever. You got any tips like that for me? Then I'll have them. I'm a sponge for information as much as anybody. But we'll see how we get on. But I'm going to be running this at 15/15s, stock settings. We'll set the sag up. When we've built your subframe, we can get you on the bike. We'll then be able to set your static sag up. Well, onto preload.
Sag up will be depending from my own weight.
Yeah, yes, yeah, pretty much, and how the bike's sitting. But we'll give it a bounce where you just sat on it, and then I'll be able to take a measurement from a point from the swing arm to the seat. It will tell me how high it is. There's another thing called preload on shock absorbers. This is called a remote preload, and it's actually oil in here. It works like a hydraulic line, and if I screw that in, it compresses the shock, so it gives it more preload onto the shock. If I wind it out, less preload on the shock. So that's dependent on how stiff it feels and alters the ride height slightly. But they're cool to have them. At superbike, especially club racing, take your knob off so people don't muck about with it.
So when it comes so far, listening to the racing and adjusting of the bike,
Yeah.
majority of the things is making the bike slightly longer, slightly shorter, and making it slightly higher or lower.
Yeah. If you can imagine
that's dramatically how it
exactly. All right. If you imagine a centre of gravity, because at the end of the day, I've got other things to take into consideration. Gyroscopic effect on the wheels. If you've ever got hold of a push bike wheel and held it by its axles, tried to spin it and held it by its axles, if you try and turn that wheel off its axis, it moans. It either wants to sit dead flat or dead upright. The gyroscopic effect of that wheel, it will have a proper moan up there. You'll be like, bloody hell, you can hardly hold it. Well, imagine two of these wheels trying to do that mid-corner. So that's another thing that you have to take in consideration, which is why people run magnesium wheels. They're lighter carbon wheels because they're lighter, slightly less gyroscopic effect on it. Although I think carbon wheels are pretty much banned, especially in road racing. I think they're banned. But that has a massive effect on the chassis. But it's all about centre of gravity and centre of mass, to where the rider is, to where everything is here. To make something sit on two wheels and behave how you want it to behave, the better and slightly lower centre of gravity that you've got, the better everything will behave on its axles. So when you're saying, yeah, if you were to draw weight front and rear, you'd soon see a sort of area here where everything's pivoting from, and that's to get that right, to get a bike sitting right. I mean, these are stock bikes. They know where the centre of gravity is. It's just a lot of time on MotoGP bikes, they'll actually move fuel, a fuel cell underneath the frame. They'll move that backwards and forwards to try and alter stuff, but that's way beyond our parameters, way beyond anything I know about. But yeah, side to side, everything revolves around a centre of mass with a bike. So rule of thumb is to try and get it as balanced as you can, and then it will feel balanced.
And you adjust.
Yeah.
Only just a little.
Yeah. Some bikes that haven't had that, or haven't had that concept behind them, are the ones that you get on and you think, this feels horrible. there's a certain Italian manufacturer that you would have thought they'd have had that absolutely nailed. Begins with M, has got a vert in it, and rhymes with Augusta. The first time I rode one of those, I was like, who's this? It feels, being an ex-racer, okay, it felt unbalanced and unweighted, and didn't matter what I did with the fork. The first thing I did when I got it home was backed everything off, tried to make it work, but it didn't want to work, and there was a thought behind that, and I don't know what the fuck it was. But it never behaved. It was never right. I might have had a Friday afternoon bike, I don't know, but it blew up in the end. But there are some bikes that you can get on and you're like, this ain't right. Most bikes that begin with D and end in Ducati are pretty balanced from the off. Whether it's steel trellis frames or what, I don't know. But mind you, if you get one that's been set up badly, if you get a 916 that's been set up badly, it will let you know, because they've got ride height adjusters on them and everything. And even how you adjust the chain is on an eccentric hub that alters the ride height of the bike. And if you've got someone that's been fucking about with that, they're a bucket of shit to ride. But we'll be right with it. Apex. Apex is spot on. But anything you want to know about suspension or anything I can help you with, or any tips that you've got, put them in the comments. That's a bit long-winded, wasn't it? Work then, do some work. I'll go and clean this back up after you've hit 10 mils of shit out of it with a hammer. Work!